Dear friends of Volumetric Trading, good morning. Tuesday, the 8th of July 2025. A daily analysis video on the S&P 500 and Nasdaq. So let's begin. Let's start as usual with the S&P 500. We have an index that yesterday, after reaching all-time highs and following a day of reduced trading, which happened on Friday, the 4th of July, throwed us yesterday a first initial sign of weakness. A weakness that is actually only apparent because what the index did was to test what have been its fairly important areas around 6,000, roughly 6,250 coming down from the highs, basically consisted of this fairly important high volume area. It was basically the only real distribution zone that the price had left behind as it kept rising in the previous days. However, a very interesting thing to note is that right in this area, 6,250, not only did we have this high volume area derived from the composite volume profile, but we also had a previous absorption zone indicated by our vol analyzer indicator, a seller absorption zone where MMH, so we can a zone that we can therefore consider as support, which was created in a sort of preemptive way before going on to make new highs, which then actually occurred on Thursday, the 3rd of July. In my opinion, this is a very important factor because having carried out this test just yesterday in the late session, and we'll also take a look at how this test was performed, but seeing such a significant rejection in this area, it identifies it as a possible support low that the volumes have pointed out to us on this instrument. The volume analysis can give us indications for this instrument, and as we can see, the market from here, this thing happened, let's say, in the late session. Then in the Asian session, the market started up again exactly from this area, beginning to to redistribute above it up to its weekly VWAP. So at the moment, we have realistically speaking, a support area right around 6,250, which can easily be extended with a bit of rounding to 6,235, 6,240. Here, this area you see here, where there's this high volume node, which basically marks the lower part of this distribution on the composite volume profile, as well as the VWAP, the -1 deviation of last week's VWAP. This whole area can realistically be considered as homogeneous. The market immediately reacted to this area highlighted by the vol analyzer and has currently created a distribution here. So between 6,250 and 6,280. At the moment, it's encountering a sort of resistance here, but let's remember that this is more or less the dynamic that's currently happening in ETH as well. So we'll definitely need to see what happens at the US market open before we can properly assess it. For now, though, we can definitely qualify this as a potential resistance area. So we have a market that for now we expect could remain range bound within this area. Why is that? Because first of all, we're right at what was, let's say, the upper limit of last week's value area, but also the upper limit of yesterday's value area, right here at 6,288, 6,290. So ideally, these are kind of the two boundary levels that we expect in some way could be tested during the US session, during the US market open. And if either one of them is broken, it could give us a continuation, okay? If the continuation were to the downside, we could definitely go and retest the 6,200 level without any problem. If the continuation were instead to the upside, we still have other fairly important resistance levels left to the north. So 6,300, 6,320. Let's move on to the Nasdaq. So it's essentially a market that at the moment is showing us signs of distribution, signs of balance. Let's take a look at the Nasdaq. So the Nasdaq has created a situation that's a bit more defined, because even though it too yesterday basically formed a price action and an acceptance that was likely bearish, fundamentally it ended up creating the exact same type of situation but visible in a different way. Why? Because that same S&P move basically led the Nasdaq to test last week's VWAP around the 22,793 area. Let's say 22,008. This area had already been quite important for the Nasdaq even in the previous days last week. And here we can clearly see that this particular test indeed happened in an area that is perhaps even more strategically significant than the SPs, precisely because it directly touched what is, in essence, this very low volume area on the composite profile, okay? Which most likely is an area that, in the absence of distribution, meaning volume, acceptance tends to be rejected. And that's exactly what happened. You can see that the market bounced from here with a bullish spike, came back to test just slightly below the high volume node that marked the boundary of this area. And then the Nasdaq also started distributing above it. And then also very interesting, in my opinion, is to look at this long-term delta that has, let's say, accumulated here around the area where we can actually see a real battle between the two sides. There's a significant accumulation of negative deltas and also just above some positive deltas. What does this likely mean? It means there was a battle. This has historically been an area of conflict between aggressive buyers and aggressive sellers. This block of aggressive sellers has further reinforced the idea of absorption that occurred in the rejection of this area. And we can see that despite everything, the Nasdaq has already broken through its most important resistance levels compared to the S&P. So we find ourselves with a Nasdaq that is definitely already at all-time highs, a bit stronger. And it's a bit stronger because it has already surpassed its value area from the previous week, its value area high. And it's even establishing its daily acceptance above the weekly VWAP. This is the VWAP for the current week. So obviously it's still in progress, still developing. And as we can see here in the intraday chart, it's also getting ready to accept above yesterday's value area high with a volume profile that's showing us acceptance, especially in the upper part of the range. So let's say that the S&P is still a bit, the S&P is still a bit developing, okay? In what could be a development, let's say, of breaking out from the distribution area it's currently in. The Nasdaq, on the other hand, is already trying to push higher, okay? So on the Nasdaq, let's see if this area around 22,930 can hold. But this can basically be understood as the whole 22,900 area, let's say. And let's see if during the cash session, it will have the strength to go back and retest 23,000, since from a volume perspective, apart from this area of bearish pressure, which, as we can see, occurred in the fairly recent past, but has already been retested once. So it may have lost some of its impactum. It will likely be a bit less significant. Obviously, all these analyses should be considered purely from an educational perspective, without any solicitation, investment advice, or recommendation to take a position. Thank you all for your attention, and I wish you a good day and good trading.